Hi, I'm David Zuckerman, Brewmaster at Boulder Beer Company. Beer is made from 4 ingredients: water, malted barley, hops, and yeast. And today we're going to talk about the role that malt has in the production of beer. Malt is the backbone of beer, and there are various varieties of malt that we use, but malt comes from barley that has been partially germinated. And the germination process allows us in the brew house to extract fermentable and unfermentable sugars, which then the fermentable sugars become alcohol, the unfermentable sugars become the body of the beer. But it is the foundation that all the other flavors kind of hang on when you're tasting a beer. From the pale malt, we as craft brewers move up in flavor. And when you move up in flavor, what that really means is you're moving up in color, and as you will see in beers, a beer produced with just pale malt would be very bright yellow. In the malting process, once the barley is chemically in the form that we want it to be in for use in the brew house, it goes into a kiln where it's dried, and depending on what temperature you use in the kilning process determines what color the malt is, and that has a direct relation to what color we extract out of it in the brew house. So these 5 malts here could be from the same field, but they're processed differently in the kilning process. So the pale malt is very light in color, doesn't give a lot of flavor, but it provides a lot of fermentability. This second malt is actually malted wheat. So this is a different ingredient that we use to add mouthfeel to beer. It adds a subtle wheat flavor to it, and it also has very foam positive attributes. The third malt we have is a crystal malt, and it provides flavor, a lot of flavor, a lot of color. It provides more mouthfeel than these other two do because there's less fermentable sugar. So the sugar that's left behind we taste as sweetness, and that helps balance out how we would use other ingredients as well. We have a chocolate malt here, which is a much higher roast. That starts to get into burnt toast flavors. And then at the top of the spectrum, we've got black malt, which is very dark, provides a lot of flavor. These malts that you get up here are largely unfermentable, but they add body to the beer. This beer is Buffalo Gold, and it's a nice example to see the 2 different malts that go into it. As I said earlier, pale malt is the base of every beer, so about 80 to 85% of the grain that goes into Buffalo Gold is the pale malt. We also use a small amount of the crystal malt, and that's where the color comes from. This is more golden than the pale malt would give you if you use that exclusively, but using the two light malts like that, it allows us to show off a subtle malt sweetness, and that's Buffalo Gold's a fairly light beer, so it's showing off a little bit of the caramel malt and a small amount of hops, and it requires not a lot of the crystal malt to get that additional color and to give the malt sweetness that we're looking for. So this beer is Singletrack, which is a copper ale. Again, it uses a combination of pale malt and a crystal malt, but it uses more of the crystal malt than the Buffalo Gold did. So you'll notice that it's a little bit more amber in color than the Buffalo Gold, and that's because of the ratio of the crystal malt to the pale malt. So there's more color coming from the crystal and less of a contribution from the pale. The result of that on your palate will be it's a little bit sweeter, and you get more of a caramel note coming through. So it's from a flavor standpoint, it's distinctly different. From a color standpoint, it's subtly different. So the ratio of pale to caramel in the Singletrack would be about 75% of the pale malt to about 25% of the crystal malt. This is Hazed and Infused, which is a little bit darker than the Singletrack. It also is brewed with the pale malt. It has crystal malt in it, but what differentiates itself from other beers is it uses a very small amount of this highly roasted malt. And in Hazed, you'll taste on the finish just a very subtle roasty, toasty flavor. And that adds a lot of dimension and complexity to the beer. It's something that just interests your brain as you're drinking it. And it helps complement the other flavors and aromas that are in the beer. This is Flashback, our brown IPA. And you can see that this is significantly darker than any other beer we've seen so far. That additional color comes from a much larger addition of these highly roasted malts. And the benefit of putting more of these highly roasted malts in is you develop much more burnt flavor, you get more chocolate overtones to it, and the Flashback, there's a lot of flavor going on in the Flashback. It's very citrusy from the hops that we use, and that plays very well against the dark chocolate component that we get from the roast malt. It plays very well together, and it's the kind of flavor that as you're tasting it, it keeps unveiling itself. So there's a lot of complexity you can get from these malts. The key is not to use too much of them and throw it out of balance. This is the Oboviod Oak Age Stout, and this uses, again, pale malt, crystal malt, and then 3 different highly roasted malts, and that's where this black color comes from. It also contributes the brown color to the head of the beer. And when you're looking at stouts, typically the head of it is much darker than it would be with a lighter colored beer. Stouts are a type of beer that a lot of home brewers like to start with because there's so much going on, so much flavor going on, and so many different malts used that it's an exciting style to get started with. I hope you've enjoyed our quick lesson on how we use malt here at Boulder Beer Company. Please feel free to come by to our restaurant and try all the different beers we have and see how we use the rest of the ingredients. We think you'll enjoy it.